The jeep bounced along the muddy German track, each jolt sending a fresh ache up Captain Jack Brennan's spine. He was too old for this. Not in years. At 40, he was technically in his prime, but in spirit. The war had ended 8 months ago, but the air in Bavaria still stank of damp concrete, diesel, and regret. He watched the pine trees slide by, their branches like skeletal fingers scratching at a gray, uncaring sky. His destination was a place called Haus Ingeborg, a name far too charming for what it was, a former SS rest house now serving as a gilded cage for the mines that had terrorized London with V-2 rockets. Jack's job, as an Army Counterintelligence Corps agent, was simple: debrief the scientists, assess their value, and, most importantly, whitewash their pasts. The operation had a benign, clerical name: Project Paperclip. The goal was to grab Hitler's brilliant brain trust before the Soviets did, scoop them up and ship them to Texas, where they would build rockets for America. It was pragmatic. It was smart. And it made Jack's stomach turn. He'd spent the last years of the war hunting Nazis, real ones, the kind who wore uniforms and believed in the nightmare. Now, he was being told to shake hands with them, to offer them a clean slate and a paycheck. The jeep slid to a halt outside a large, timber-framed lodge. "Here we are, sir," the driver said. "The Genius Factory." Jack grunted, stepping out into the cold mud. He adjusted his uniform, a shield he no longer felt proud of, and walked towards the door. The real work was about to begin. Inside, Haus Ingeborg was a bizarre mix of mountain charm and military interrogation. Polished wooden floors were scarred by boot marks, and antlered deer heads on the wall stared down at armed MPs. The air was thick with the smell of coffee, cigarette smoke, and the low, anxious hum of German being spoken. A young lieutenant, bright-eyed and eager, met him. "Captain Brennan? I'm Lieutenant Miller. We've got them all set up in the dining hall. Quite a collection. Just point me to Von Braun's inner circle," Jack said, his voice a low rumble. "I want the ones with the most secrets, not just the big names." Miller nodded, leading him through a hallway. "Well, you'll want Dr. Kessler then. Klaus Kessler. He was Von Braun's chief propulsion engineer. The man is a certified genius. His debriefing notes on fuel injector systems are breathtaking." Jack stopped. "And his file? The one we don't put in the notes?" Miller's smile faltered. That. He was SS, sir. Hauptsturmführer. Joined in 34. Party member number is low, meaning he was an early, true believer. Jack felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest. An early believer. That meant he wasn't just some engineer who got swept up. He was there at the beginning, when the nightmare was just a twisted dream. "Where is he?" Miller gestured to a closed door. "Library. He's been waiting for you." "He's polite." Jack pushed the door open. The library was a small, warm room, lined with books salvaged from only God knew where. And sitting in a leather armchair, legs crossed, was Dr. Klaus Kessler. He wasn't a monster. He was a handsome man in his late 30s, with sharp, intelligent features, slicked back dark hair, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He looked up from a book of poetry and offered a small, composed smile. "Her captain," he said in flawless, lightly accented English. "I have been looking forward to this." Jack took the chair opposite, placing his file on the small table between them. He said nothing, letting the silence stretch, a classic interrogation tactic. Kessler endured it with an unnerving calm, his gaze steady. He finally gestured to the file. "My life, I assume, reduced to paper." "A start," Jack said, his voice flat. "We have a lot of gaps. Your work at Piemont is well documented. The V2, a marvel of engineering." Kessler inclined his head slightly, accepting the compliment. It was a scientific challenge. We were pushing the boundaries of the possible. "Boundaries," Jack repeated, letting the word hang. "What about the Mittelbau-Dora camp? The factory where your marvels were built? What boundaries were you pushing there?" Kessler's smile didn't vanish, but it tightened at the edges. "That was an unfortunate necessity of war. The SS handled labor. We were scientists. Our focus was on the stars, not the ground-level logistics." Jack leaned forward, just an inch. "Ground-level logistics. Is that what you call it? The 12-hour shifts, the starvation, the hangings on the crane gantries to motivate the workers. I've seen the photos, Doctor. The dead were so thin they looked like sketches of men." For the first time, a flicker of something, annoyance, crossed Kessler's face. Captain, I understand your position, but you must see the larger picture. We are now on the same side. My knowledge, the knowledge of all of us here, can help America reach the moon. Can you truly let the past stand in the way of that future? He spoke so reasonably, so logically. It was the same logic Jack heard from his own superiors. It was the logic that was making him feel sick. Jack opened the file, not looking at it. You joined the SS in 1934. That wasn't about science. That was about ideology. Tell me about that. Kessler sighed, as if explaining something simple to a child. It was a different time. Germany was on its knees. The party promised strength, order, a return to glory. For a young man, it was intoxicating. We believed we were building a 1,000-year Reich. He looked out the window, at the gray Bavarian sky. We were wrong, of course. But belief is a powerful thing. It can make you see angels where there are only devils. Jack's eyes narrowed. The man was a snake, coiling his past in pretty words. I'm not here to talk about belief. I'm here to talk about facts. Your file says you were present at the liquidation of a suspected partisan cell near Piedmont in 1943. What does liquidation mean, Doctor? Kessler's composure finally cracked. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He looked back at Jack, and the winter in his eyes seemed to deepen. That is an SS term. I was an engineer. My work was with equations and metals, not that. But you were there. Jack pressed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Weren't you? The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock on the mantelpiece. Kessler looked from Jack's face to the file, then back again. The polite, cooperative scientist was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. Captain, he said, his voice now devoid of all warmth. You have your orders, do you not? To secure my cooperation. To make me a happy, productive member of your American team. Digging in the mud of the past does not serve that goal. It only makes things messy. Jack held his gaze. This was the man, stripped of the pretense. Not a misguided genius, but a calculating former SS officer who knew his own value and was using it as a shield. I decide what serves my goal, Doctor. He stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. We're done for today. Kessler leaned back, the ghost of his smile returning. It was a smug, victorious expression. Of course, Captain. I am at your disposal. Always. Jack walked out of the library, his heart pounding with a cold, clean fury. He found Miller waiting outside. Sir? How did it go? Jack didn't answer. He strode down the hall, out the front door, and into the damp cold. He needed air. He leaned against the cold timber of the lodge, lighting a cigarette with a trembling hand. He had met monsters before, the kind who roared and threatened. Kessler was worse. He was a monster who quoted poetry and spoke of the stars, a monster who knew he was already forgiven because he was useful. Jack took a long drag, the smoke burning his lungs. Following orders would be easy. It would be a quiet, comfortable path. But as he stood there in the German twilight, he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he couldn't do it. He couldn't just whitewash the blood from this man's hands. Somewhere, in the ghostly silence of the pine forest, he felt the weight of the dead from Middle Badora, and he knew he had to find a different kind of justice. The next morning, Jack Brennan didn't go to the debriefing room. He went to the record cellar. It was a damp, concrete-lined space beneath the lodge, filled with the musty smell of old paper and defeat. This was where they kept the uncensored truth, the captured German administrative files that were too raw, too explicit for the sanitized reports of Project Paperclip. A single bare bulb swung from a wire, casting long, dancing shadows. A young corporal named Evans looked up from a crate, his face pale. Captain, I was just cataloging some of the Dora files. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the stacks of crates and loose-leaf binders. I'm looking for anything on an SS action near Piedmont, late 43. A partisan liquidation. And I want Klaus Kessler's personnel file, the one from the SS Security Service, not the rocket team roster. Evans swallowed hard. Sir, those files they're not part of the standard vetting process. My orders are. Your orders are to assist me, Corporal, Jack said, his voice low but leaving no room for argument. I'm conducting a counterintelligence assessment. A deep one. So help me. Evans, cowed, pointed a shaky finger towards a metal cabinet in the corner. The really bad stuff is in there, sir. The stuff we're not supposed to look at. Jack walked over. The cabinet was locked. He looked back at Evans, who reluctantly handed over a small, tarnished key. The metal drawer screeched open like a tortured soul. The search began. For 2 hours, Jack waded through a river of names, dates, and cold, bureaucratic evil. He found Kessler's official SS file. It was all there in stark, typed German. His early, fervent membership, his promotions, his postings. But the liquidation was a ghost. He found nothing. He was about to slam the drawer shut in frustration when a slim, unmarked folder, tucked behind a stack of pay ledgers, caught his eye. He pulled it out. It wasn't an official report. It was a personal letter written in a tight, precise script, dated November 12, 1943. The salutation made his blood run cold. Mein lieber Klaus. It was addressed to Kessler. He skimmed the contents. It was from a comrade, reminiscing about a recent successful action that had cleansed the area of the partisan vermin. The writer mentioned the efficiency of the operation and how it was a pity that Kessler's particular method of interrogation on one of the prisoners could not be repeated due to the subject's unfortunate demise. The letter was signed with a flourish. MIT Kameradschaftlichem Gruß, Eric. Jack's hands were steady as he folded the letter and slipped it into his tunic pocket. He had his hook. Now he needed to find the fisherman. Who was Eric? Back upstairs, the atmosphere in House Ingeborg had shifted. The scientists were louder, more confident, joking with the American guards. They could smell their own impunity. Jack saw Kessler holding cord in the dining hall, explaining a complex orbital mechanic to a captivated young American lieutenant, drawing elegant lines in the air with his fingers. He was a star, and he knew it. Jack didn't interrupt. He found Lieutenant Miller. The letter from Eric, Jack said without preamble, watching Kessler from across the room. I need a name. A comrade of Kessler's, probably SS, first name Eric. He was with him at Peenemünde in late 43. Miller's eyes widened. Sir, that's not our directive. It is now, Jack said. Check the rosters. Cross-reference the personnel list from Peenemunde's SS detachment. Find me and Eric. Just then, a commotion came from the main entrance. A new group of Germans was being processed, fresh from another detention center. They looked tired, scared, and utterly defeated. And among them, Jack's eyes locked onto one man. He was older, gaunt, with a deep scar running down his cheek. But it was the look in his eyes, a hollow, 1,000-yard stare of pure trauma, that held Jack. This man wasn't a confident scientist. This man was a ghost. And his prisoner number, stenciled on his ragged coat, identified him as a former inmate of Mittelbau-Dora. Jack moved without thinking. He strode over to the processing desk, cutting off the MP sergeant. This one, Jack said, pointing to the gaunt man. I need him for questioning. Now, the sergeant looked confused. Sir, he's just a laborer. A Pole. We're processing him for repatriation. My investigation trumps repatriation, Jack stated, his tone brooking no argument. He guided the stunned man away from the others, down a side corridor and into a small, empty storage room. The man flinched when Jack closed the door, his body tensing as if expecting a blow. It's all right, Jack said in German, keeping his voice soft. I'm not going to hurt you. I need information. He showed the man his CIC badge. My name is Captain Brennan. What is your name? The man's eyes darted around the room before settling on Jack's. Tomasz, he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. Tomasz Wojcik. Jack pulled the photo of Kessler from his file. Do you know this man? Tomasz's reaction was instant and visceral. He recoiled, pressing himself against the wall, a low moan escaping his lips. He knew him. Oh, he knew him. Please, Tomasz begged, his hands shaking. I cannot. They will find out. They always find out. Jack knelt down, putting himself at eye level with the terrified man. Tomasz, look at me. No one is going to hurt you. I am trying to hold him accountable, but I need to know what he did. Tears welled in Tomasz's eyes. He was der Geist, the ghost. That is what we called him, because he would appear clean and perfect in his black uniform, and people would disappear. He took a ragged breath. At the factory, he was not just an engineer. He came to the tunnels. He would point at a worker, say the work was too slow, that the part was defective. It was a lie. It was always a lie. He just liked it. He liked the power. Tomasz was trembling uncontrollably now. One day, my friend, Pyotr, he looked at Der Geist for too long. He did not look away fast enough. Der Geist, he smiled. A small smile. He told the guards that Pyotr was sabotaging a fuel line. They took him to the punishment bunker. Tomasz met Jack's eyes, his own filled with a bottomless horror. He was not just an engineer, her captain. He was one of them. In his soul, Jack felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was it. This was the truth that lay beneath the polished surface of the rocket science. It wasn't just about following orders for Kessler. It was about pleasure. He had to get Tomasz to testify. But as he looked at the broken man in front of him, he knew it would be like asking a ghost to speak. Getting Tomasz to agree to a formal statement was like trying to coax a bird with a broken wing to fly. He was terrified, convinced that Kessler's reach was infinite, that the shadow of the SS could stretch across an ocean. "They are all together here," Tomasz whispered, his eyes darting towards the closed door. "The officers, the scientists, it is the same. They protect each other. They will kill me and say I fell down the stairs." Jack knew he had to move him. House Ingeborg was a nest of vipers, and Tomasz was a mouse dropped right into the middle of it. He used his authority to have Tomasz officially classified as a material witness in a counterintelligence investigation, a vague term that allowed him to transfer the Pole to a smaller, safer safe house in a nearby village. A quiet, gray cottage with an American MP named O'Malley, a man with a kind face and a solid build, standing guard. It was there, over a bowl of hot stew, that Tomasz began to talk in more than terrified fragments. He was different from the others, Tomasz said, his voice a little stronger with food in his belly. The other engineers, they looked through us. We were machinery to them. But der Geist, he saw us. He would walk the production line, and his eyes, they would stop on you. It was like being weighed. It was the worst feeling in the world. Back at House Ingeborg, Jack played his part. He continued the official debriefings with Kessler, sitting across the same table in the library. But the dynamic had shifted. Jack was no longer just a frustrated bureaucrat. He was a hunter, and he let a sliver of that show. "Your work on the turbopump assembly is fascinating, Doctor," Jack said, his tone conversational. "It must have been frustrating when the slave labor couldn't achieve the tolerances you needed. What did you do when a worker failed you?" Kessler's wintry eyes narrowed just a fraction. He was a master of this game, sensing the new undercurrent. "As I said, Captain, that was an SS matter. I reported deficiencies. They handled the discipline." Jack leaned back, feigning casualness. "I see. And did you ever feel the SS methods were inefficient? I've heard from other sources that you had a more hands-on approach." He let the phrase hang in the air. Kessler went very still. The polite mask was firmly in place, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I am afraid your other sources are mistaken, or perhaps they are lying. It is a difficult time. People say many things." He picked up his pen, a clear signal that he considered the topic closed. "Shall we return to the fuel mixture ratios? I believe that is why we are both here." The challenge had been silently issued and just as silently accepted. The chess match had begun. The break came from an unexpected place. Lieutenant Miller, looking more nervous than ever, approached Jack as he was leaving the mess hall. "Sir, I did what you asked. About the name Eric." He glanced around before handing Jack a folded piece of paper. "I cross-referenced the SS roster with the Pienmund payroll. There was only one Eric in Kessler's unit with the rank to be a close comrade. Eric Hauser." Jack unfolded the paper. It was a brief personnel record. "Eric Hauser, SS Sturmbannführer. Where is he now?" Jack asked, his pulse quickening. Miller shook his head. "That's the thing, sir. He's dead. Listed as killed in action during the Soviet advance on Berlin, April 45. Jack's hope deflated. A dead end. But then Miller added, "But there's a note in the margin here, see? From an earlier transfer order. It mentions his wife, Greta Hauser. Last known address, a village called Schwanfeld. It's less than 50 miles from here. A widow. A woman who might have received letters from her husband. A woman who might know things." It was a thread, thin and fragile, but it was all he had. He clapped Miller on the shoulder, making the young lieutenant jump. "Good work, Miller. Real good work." For the first time, Jack felt a flicker of momentum. He was no longer just digging in the past. He was following a trail. Getting a jeep and authorization for a field investigation was easy. No one questioned a CIC agent. The drive to Schwanfeld was through rolling, war-scarred countryside. The village was a cluster of houses huddled around a church, so quiet it seemed to be holding its breath. The Hauser address was a small, neat cottage at the edge of the village, its gardens surprisingly well-tended amidst the general neglect. A woman answered the door. Greta Hauser was in her late 30s, pale and thin, with eyes that had seen too much. She wore a simple black dress, widow's weeds. When Jack introduced himself, her face tightened with immediate fear. "I have nothing to say to the Americans. My husband is dead. Leave me alone." She moved to shut the door, but Jack was faster, not with force, but with words. "I'm not here about your husband's actions, Frau Hauser," Jack said, his German soft. "I'm here about Klaus Kessler." The name had a physical effect on her. She flinched, her hand freezing on the door. She looked past Jack, scanning the empty street, her fear palpable. "Please," Jack said. "He is about to be given a new life in America. A hero's welcome. Your husband is gone. But Kessler, he gets to win. Does that seem just to you?" For a long moment, Greta Hauser stood in the doorway, a silent war playing out on her face. Fear against a bitter, lingering anger. Finally, with a resigned sigh, she stepped back and let him in. The cottage was Spartan but clean. On a small side table, next to a framed photo of a stern-looking man in an SS uniform, Eric, was a small, carved wooden box. She didn't offer him a seat or a drink. She went straight to the box, opening it with a key she wore around her neck. "Eric was a fool," she said, her voice hollow. "A loyal, brave fool. He thought Kessler was his friend. But Kessler was only ever Kessler's friend." She pulled out a small bundle of letters, tied with a black ribbon. "He wrote to me, near the end. He was disillusioned. He saw the monster behind the genius." She handed one letter to Jack. It was dated March 1945. Jack's eyes scanned the frantic script. "Klaus grows more detached, more cruel. He speaks of the coming defeat as a scientific experiment that failed. At Piedmont, during the partisan cleansing, it was he who insisted on interrogating the schoolteacher. He enjoyed it, Greta. I saw it in his eyes. It was not duty. It was a hunger. I fear I have served a devil who wears the face of an angel." Jack looked up from the damning words, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had it. Not just hearsay from a traumatized survivor, but a confession from a fellow SS officer. He had the weapon he needed. Greta Hauser looked at him, her eyes filled with a cold, grim satisfaction. "So, Captain," she said, "what will you do with your devil now?" The drive back from Schwanfeld was a blur. Jack's mind raced, the frantic words of Eric Hauser's letter echoing in his head. A devil who wears the face of an angel. He had the evidence now, solid and cold. It was time to force a confrontation. He wouldn't just file a report. Kessler would look him in the eye and answer for it. He burst into House Ingeborg, his boots echoing on the polished floor with a new, purposeful energy. He ignored the startled looks from the other scientists and MPs, heading straight for the library. But Kessler wasn't there. Lieutenant Miller intercepted him, his face a mask of anxiety. "Sir, Colonel Abernathy is here. From Washington. He's in with Kessler right now, in the officer's lounge." Jack's blood ran cold. Abernathy was the Pentagon's head of Project Paperclip, a political general whose only god was progress. His presence meant the final selection of scientists was being made. The deals were being signed. Jack changed course, striding towards the lounge. He could hear the faint sound of laughter from inside. It made his skin crawl. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open. The scene inside was like a punch to the gut. Colonel Abernathy, a portly man with a jovial, red face, was clapping a smiling Kessler on the back. They stood near a table littered with maps of New Mexico and schematics of rockets. 2 glasses of brandy sat between them. "Brennan," Abernathy boomed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Just the man. I was telling the good doctor here what a fine job your team has done. We're finalizing the travel arrangements. He'll be on next week's transport to Fort Bliss." Jack stood rigid, his hand clenched around the letters in his pocket. "Sir, I need a word. In private. It's a matter of urgent security." Abernathy's smile tightened. "Can it wait, Captain? We're celebrating a new dawn for American rocketry." Kessler watched Jack over the rim of his brandy glass, his expression one of mild, polite curiosity. He knew exactly why Jack was there, and he was enjoying the spectacle. "It cannot wait, sir," Jack said, his voice dangerously calm. He turned his gaze to Kessler. "I have new evidence pertaining to Dr. Kessler's wartime activities. Evidence of war crimes that go far beyond mere party membership." The room went silent. Abernathy's joviality vanished, replaced by the cold steel of a bureaucrat whose project was being threatened. "Captain, I think you're overstepping. The vetting process is complete. The decision has been made." "The process was a sham, Colonel," Jack shot back, pulling the letters from his pocket. "I have a sworn statement from a Dora survivor and a deathbed confession from a fellow SS officer that implicates Kessler in torture and murder. He wasn't just an engineer. He was a perpetrator." He slapped the papers down on the table, right on top of a rocket schematic. Kessler's smile finally faded. He looked at the letters, then at Jack, and a new, cold respect flickered in his eyes. The game had changed. Abernathy picked up Hauser's letter, his eyes scanning it with growing irritation, not horror. He tossed it back down. This? The rantings of a dead Nazi, trying to salve his conscience? And some Polak who'd say anything for an extra ration pack? This is what you're basing this insubordination on. He stepped closer to Jack, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Listen to me, Brennan. The president wants these men. The Joint Chiefs want these men. We are in a race with Stalin for the heavens. I will not let you torpedo this over a few dead partisans." Jack felt the world tilting. The evidence he had risked so much for was being dismissed as garbage. The moral lines he thought were so clear were being smudged into nothing by the pragmatism of power. They were people, Colonel, not partisans. They were murdered. Abernathy's face was stone. "Stand down, Captain. That's a direct order. Your investigation is closed. You will hand over all your notes, and these are relevant documents to me." Now, for a long, suspended moment, Jack stood at the precipice. He could follow orders. He could salute, say yes, sir, and walk away. He could go back to a quiet life. He looked at Kessler, who had retrieved his brandy and was watching the scene with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab experiment. He had won. He had always known he would win. Then Jack thought of Tomáš's hollow eyes. He thought of the schoolteacher mentioned in Hauser's letter. He thought of the dead on the crane gantries. He looked Abernathy dead in the eye. "No, sir," Jack said, his voice quiet but absolute. "I will not." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He had just thrown his career away. He was alone now, officially outside the system. But as he walked down the hall, a strange sense of peace settled over him. For the first time since he'd arrived in Germany, he knew exactly what he had to do. If the system wouldn't deliver justice, he would have to find another way. The silence in Jack's small office was heavier than any he'd ever known. It was the silence of a door slamming shut. He could almost hear the gears of the military machine grinding on without him. Colonel Abernathy's order to stand down wasn't a suggestion, it was a guillotine. By refusing, he had cut himself loose. He was no longer Captain Brennan, CIC agent. He was just a man in a uniform with a target on his back. His first move was pure instinct. He went to the safe house. O'Malley, the MP, was standing guard outside the cottage, looking bored but vigilant. "Any trouble?" Jack asked, his voice rough. "Quiet as a mouse, sir," O'Malley replied. "He's been pacing a bit, but that's all." Inside, Tomáš was indeed pacing, a caged animal. When he saw Jack, he stopped, his eyes searching Jack's face for news. The hope in them was a physical pain. "It's done?" Tomáš asked, his voice fragile. Jack shook his head. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told him about Abernathy, about the orders, about the transport to America. Tomáš listened, and with every word, the fragile light in his eyes died, replaced by the old, familiar terror. "I told you," he whispered, sinking onto a wooden chair. "They always win. The men in the clean uniforms, they always win." Jack knelt in front of him. "Look at me, Tomáš. They are not going to win. Not this time. But I can't protect you here anymore. They will come for my files. They will come for you." He made a decision, the first of many that would take him far outside the lines. "O'Malley," the MP stepped inside. "Sir." Jack stood up. "We're moving him. Right now. You and me. We're going to take him to a priest I know in Garmisch. A good man. He'll be safe there, off the books." O'Malley, to his credit, didn't question the irregular order. He just saw the resolve in Jack's eyes and nodded. "Yes, sir." Getting Tomáš out of the safe house and into the Jeep felt like a scene from a spy movie. Jack used back routes, his senses on high alert, expecting an MP Jeep to block their path at any moment. He kept the letters from Greta Hauser and his own notes on his person, a folded secret against his heart. The drive to Garmisch was tense and silent. The priest, Father Emmerich, was an old, stooped man with kind eyes who had seen the war pass by his doorstep. He asked no questions when Jack, in a hushed conversation on his doorstep, explained that Tomasz needed sanctuary. He simply looked at Tomasz's haunted face and opened the door wider. "God's house is open to all," he said softly. It was one small victory. But as Jack and O'Malley drove back towards House Ingeborg, the reality of his situation settled in. He was now actively hiding a material witness from his own command. If Abernathy found out, it wouldn't just be the end of his career, it would be a court-martial, a prison cell at Leavenworth. O'Malley, sensing the storm clouds, finally spoke. "Sir, what's the plan? I'm with you, you know that. But what are we doing?" Jack stared at the winding road ahead. "The official channels are closed to us, O'Malley. So we go unofficial. Kessler thinks he's untouchable. He thinks his genius is a shield. We need to prove him wrong. We need to get him to admit what he is, on the record, before he gets on that plane." "And how do we do that, sir?" O'Malley asked, his brow furrowed. A grim smile touched Jack's lips. "We use what he hates most. Inefficiency. In a messy, emotional scene. We're going to shake the tree, Corporal, and we're going to see what rotten fruit falls out." The tree shaking began the next morning. Jack, stripped of his official duties but not yet officially relieved, used the lingering confusion about his status to his advantage. His first target wasn't Kessler, but the other scientists. He started pulling them in for follow-up questions, focusing on the weaker links, the ones who seemed more nervous, less arrogant than Kessler. He asked them not about fuel mixtures, but about their colleagues. About Klaus Kessler. Was he well-liked? Jack asked a jittery metallurgist named Huber. Did he socialize? Did he ever speak of the work at the camp? Huber squirmed, his eyes darting everywhere. He was respected, feared a little. He had friends in the SS, you see. It was not wise to cross him. Friends like Erich Hauser? Jack pressed, watching the man closely. Huber's face went pale. Hauser? He is dead. I know, Jack said softly. But before he died, he had quite a lot to say. He didn't elaborate. He just let the poisoned seed of suspicion take root. He did this with 3 other junior scientists, each time mentioning Hauser's name, each time implying he had a treasure trove of damning information. He was playing a game of psychological warfare, knowing the gossip would snake its way back to Kessler. He wanted Kessler to feel the walls closing in, to wonder what his dead comrade had truly confessed. The second part of his plan was riskier. He needed to get a message to the one person who might have both the motive and the means to help him, Greta Hauser. He couldn't go back himself. He was sure Abernathy would have him watched. So he sent O'Malley, in civilian clothes, on a motorcycle. The message was simple. The official path is blocked. The devil is being rewarded. If you have anything else, any proof that cannot be ignored, now is the time. O'Malley returned that evening, his face grim. She was scared, sir. Really scared. Said men had been asking about her in the village after you left. American men. Jack's heart sank. Abernathy was cleaning house, but O'Malley handed him a small, folded square of oilcloth. She gave me this. Said her husband sent it to her for safekeeping. She called it his insurance policy. Jack unfolded the cloth. Inside was a single photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance with a long lens, but the subjects were clear. It showed a group of SS officers standing in a forest clearing. In the foreground, Erich Hauser looked uncomfortable, his hands in his pockets. And next to him, standing tall and clean, was Klaus Kessler. But it wasn't the men that made Jack's breath catch. It was what was at their feet. 3 bodies, lying in the dirt. And Kessler wasn't just standing there. He was pointing at one of the corpses with the tip of his polished boot, a look of cold, analytical curiosity on his face. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a frozen moment of damnation. Jack now had the photograph. It was the final piece. But a photograph alone could be explained away. A tragic necessity of war. I was simply identifying. He needed a confession. He needed to look Kessler in the eye one last time and use every weapon in his arsenal. He chose his moment carefully. The night before Kessler's scheduled departure. The atmosphere in House Ingeborg was a bizarre mix of a graduation party and a military operation. Crates were being packed, goodbyes were being said. Jack found Kessler in the library, alone, calmly placing a few final books into a leather suitcase. He looked up as Jack entered. The polite mask was back, but there was a new tension around his mouth. The gossip had reached him. "Captain Brennan," he said, his voice cool. "I understood our business was concluded." "It is," Jack said, closing the door behind him. "But I have a going-away present for you." He didn't sit. He stood by the door, a silent sentinel. He started talking. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply laid out the entire, sordid story, weaving it together like a prosecutor giving a closing argument. He spoke of Tomasz Wojcik and the name Der Geist. He recited passages from Erich Hauser's letter, watching Kessler's knuckles whiten on the edge of the suitcase. He described the fear in Greta Hauser's eyes. Kessler listened, his face a frozen mask. He offered no denials. He just waited. Finally, Jack walked forward and placed the photograph on top of the books in the suitcase. Kessler looked down at it. For a full 10 seconds, there was only the sound of the clock ticking. Then, he did something unexpected. He laughed, a soft, chilling sound. He picked up the photograph, studied it with a scientist's detachment, and then looked at Jack, his wintry eyes gleaming with something like triumph. "And what will you do with this, Captain? Show it to your colonel? He will burn it. Show it to the newspapers? They will not print it. My work is too important. Don't you see? You have proof of a monster, but the world only wants the genius." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have lost. You are a ghost, chasing the wind. And tomorrow, I will be on a plane, flying towards the future. Your future." He placed the photograph back in Jack's hand. "Keep it. A souvenir of your futile little crusade." Jack stood there, the photograph feeling like a lead weight. Kessler was right. He had all the evidence, and it was utterly, completely useless. He had played every card, and he had still lost. The system was too big, the stakes too high. He had nothing left. Or did he? As he looked into Kessler's smug, victorious face, a new, desperate idea began to form in his mind. A final, reckless roll of the dice. If he couldn't get justice through the system, and he couldn't get a confession, there was one thing left he could do. He could make sure Werner von Braun himself knew exactly who he was taking to America. The click of the library door behind him felt like the seal on a tomb. Jack stood in the hallway, the ghost of Kessler's mocking laugh echoing in his ears. The photograph in his hand was no longer a piece of evidence. It was a monument to his failure. He had the truth, the whole, ugly, undeniable truth, and it was worthless. The machine of power and progress had simply rolled over it, crushing his principles into the mud. For a moment, a profound and weary emptiness threatened to swallow him whole. He could just let go, walk away, let the devil fly to Texas and be done with it. But then he saw Tamash's face, the flicker of hope being extinguished. He heard the rasp in the man's voice. They always win. He couldn't let that be the end of the story. Kessler was right about one thing. Colonel Abernathy and the newspapers were dead ends. But there was one more person, the only person whose opinion might actually carry weight in this twisted equation. Werner von Braun himself. The celebrated genius, the charismatic leader of the rocket team. The man who would be Kessler's boss in America. What if he knew? Not the sanitized version, but the real one. The man who sold himself as a visionary forced to work for the Nazis. What would he do if he was forced to look at the photograph of his chief engineer pointing his boot at a corpse? It was a desperate, almost childish hope. But it was the last card he had to play. He found Lieutenant Miller in the comms room, looking exhausted and guilty. "Miller, I need one last thing. I need to know where von Braun is being quartered tonight. Not tomorrow, before the flight. Tonight." Miller looked like he might be sick. "Captain, please. Abernathy has me filing transfer paperwork all night. If I help you, and he finds out," Jack leaned in close. "You looked for Erich Hauser for me. You knew why. You knew it was right. Look me in the eye and tell me you think Klaus Kessler deserves a hero's welcome in the country your brother died for." Miller flinched. His older brother had been killed in the Ardennes. He held Jack's gaze for a long moment, then sighed, scribbling an address on a slip of paper. "It's a private villa on the Starnberger Sea. He's there with his family. But the place is guarded, sir. Inside and out." Jack took the paper. "Thank you, Miller." As he turned to leave, Miller added softly, "For what it's worth, good luck, sir." The villa by the lake was a picture of serene opulence, a world away from the grim utility of House Ingeborg. Lights glowed warmly behind large windows, reflecting on the dark, placid water of the Starnberger Sea. Jack saw 2 MPs stationed at the front gate and another patrolling the perimeter. He wasn't getting in the front door. He parked his Jeep a half-mile down the road and approached through the woods, moving with a stealth honed by years of field work. The cold night air was sharp in his lungs. He felt like a burglar, a ghost haunting the edges of the new reality being built. He found a service entrance at the back, near the kitchens. It was unlocked. Slipping inside, he found himself in a dark pantry, smelling of potatoes and wax. He could hear the faint sound of a piano from deeper within the house. Mozart. He moved through the servants' corridors, a shadow in the belly of the beast. He followed the music to a set of double doors, slightly ajar. Peering through the crack, he saw a magnificent library. And there he was, Wernher von Braun. He was younger than in the famous photos, tall, impeccably dressed in a suit, not a uniform. He was standing by a grand fireplace, a glass of wine in his hand, looking every inch the benevolent visionary. He was speaking in German to another man, one of his deputies. Jack's German was good enough to catch the tail end of the conversation. And the payload calculations are finally correct. It is a new beginning, Carl. A true beginning. This was it. Jack took a deep breath, pushed the doors open, and stepped into the light. Both men spun around, startled. Von Braun's eyes widened in shock, and then recognition. Captain Brennan, is it? What is the meaning of this? How did you get in here? The other scientist took a step forward, but von Braun held up a hand, his curiosity outweighing his alarm. I apologize for the intrusion, Herr Doctor, Jack said, his voice calm but firm. I have something you need to see. Something that concerns the team you are taking to America. Specifically, Klaus Kessler. Von Braun's expression shifted from shock to a weary irritation. Captain, this is highly irregular. Dr. Kessler's record has been vetted and approved by your own superiors. I will not have this melodrama in my home. This isn't about his record, Jack said, stepping closer. He ignored the other scientist's glare. This is about his character. The character of the man who will be your right hand. The man you will trust. He held out the photograph. Von Braun hesitated, then took it. He held it up to the light from the fireplace. Jack watched his face, searching for a flinch, a gasp, a moment of human revulsion. For a long time, there was nothing. Von Braun's face was a mask of intense study, as if he were analyzing a flawed engineering schematic. He finally lowered the photograph, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked at Jack, and his eyes were not filled with horror, but with a profound and unsettling pity. Captain, he said, his voice soft, almost sorrowful. War is a terrible thing. It forces men into terrible situations. Klaus was an SS officer. This was his duty. An unpleasant one, to be sure. But we cannot judge a man solely by the worst moment of his life, caught on film by God knows who. Jack felt the ground disappear beneath him. He had been prepared for anger, for denial. He wasn't prepared for this rationalization. That's not a moment, Jack said, his voice trembling with fury he fought to control. That's who he is. He enjoyed it. Your own man, Erich Hauser, wrote that he saw a hunger in Kessler's eyes. Von Braun handed the photograph back as if it were a piece of trash. Hauser is dead, and we are alive, with a chance to change the world. You are asking me to throw away one of the finest propulsion minds on the planet over this? Do you know what is at stake? The future of the free world rests on our success. He gestured around the beautiful room, a symbol of the prize he had won. You are a soldier. You understand sacrifice for a greater cause. This, he said, pointing at the photograph now in Jack's hand, is the cost. A cost we must be willing to bear. The conversation was over. Jack had lost. He had played his final card, and it had been dismissed by the man he thought might, just might, have a shred of conscience. Von Braun wasn't a monster like Kessler. He was something perhaps more dangerous, a man so blinded by his own grand vision that he was willing to make a deal with any devil to see it realized. The greater good was a seductive poison, and von Braun had drunk it deeply. Jack walked out of the villa the same way he came in, a ghost once more. The cold night air felt like a judgment. He drove back through the darkness, not to House Ingeborg, but to the church in Garmisch. He found Father Emmerich, who led him to a small cot in the rectory where Tomasz was sleeping fitfully. Jack sat on a wooden chair beside the bed, the weight of his failure a physical pressure on his chest. He had tried everything. The system, a direct confrontation, an appeal to a higher authority. He had gathered more evidence than most war crimes prosecutors ever saw, and it had amounted to nothing. As dawn began to lighten the sky, painting the Alps in hues of rose and gold, Tomasz stirred and saw him. He didn't need to ask. He saw the answer in the slump of Jack's shoulders, the hollow look in his eyes. Tomasz just nodded slowly, a silent acceptance of a world he had always known to be cruel. "I am sorry, my friend," Tomasz whispered. Jack didn't know if Tomasz was apologizing for his own fate or for Jack's failure. It didn't matter. In that quiet, sacred space, as a new day began, Jack Brennan made his final choice. If he could not get justice, he would not be complicit in the reward. He would not be a part of the machine that whitewashed Klaus Kessler's soul. He stood up, his decision made. He would not be on the tarmac to see them off. He would not file a final report. He would resign his commission. It was a small, personal act of defiance. It wouldn't change the world. It wouldn't stop the rocket. But it would mean that one man, at least, had refused to look away. Later that morning, at a fog-shrouded airfield, the transport plane's engines whined to life. Colonel Abernathy stood, smiling, shaking hands with Wernher von Braun and his team as they climbed the ramp. Klaus Kessler was among them, carrying his leather suitcase of books. He paused at the top of the ramp and looked out over the airfield, his eyes scanning the small crowd of officials and MPs. He was looking for one face. He didn't see it. A faint, almost imperceptible frown touched his lips, then vanished. He had won everything, but the one man whose judgment he had secretly craved to break was not there to witness his victory. It was an incomplete triumph. The plane door closed, and the giant aircraft began to taxi, carrying its cargo of genius and sin towards the new world. At that exact moment, 50 miles away, Jack Brennan was standing on a different platform, waiting for a different kind of transport, a rattling train that would take him to a processing center for his discharge papers. He carried a single duffel bag. In his pocket was a folded, oilcloth-wrapped photograph. He wasn't a hero. He hadn't stopped anything. The rockets would fly, and Kessler would help them. But as Jack boarded the train and found a seat, looking out at the war-torn German countryside, he felt a strange, quiet peace. He had kept his own conscience. In the end, in a world gone mad with pragmatism, that was the only victory possible. He had lost the battle for justice, but he had won the war for his own soul. And as the train pulled away, he knew that for a man like him, that was the only victory that would ever truly matter.